My name's John Lucenius. I've been doing forensics probably since the early 90s. I've been programming computers since the late 70s in high school. The but this talk is about forensics, and it's particularly about lockpicking forensics. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically start from scratch here. We're going to say, if I need to do forensics on a lock, what do I need to do? Well, first you're going to need to understand what forensics is, and then what a lock is, how it works, how to pick a lock, and what it looks like forensically afterwards. So at the end of this presentation, we should just rip apart a lock and put it under a microscope and see what we see. That's the end game here. But to get there, let's talk about forensics real quick. I do have some slides. The PowerPoint and Discord aren't working together right now, so oh well. Let me know if you. Well, hopefully we'll get the video screen up with the microscope here at the end of the show. So forensics. The main principle in forensics, no matter if you're looking at a crime scene, a murder scene, looking at a hard drive, looking at a lock, is you can't enter someplace without leaving something behind. You can't leave someplace without taking something with you. That's the principle of forensics. You're going to leave something behind, and there should be evidence that you take out with you. It's a little bit harder digitally when you hit a web server. I understand that, but the same principles still apply, especially in lockpicking, right? We're talking about physical locks here. At least with the traditional forensics on, say, a hard drive, I can clone a hard drive. I can clone a VM of a server and look at that. I can use a write blocker to not alter the evidence. With a lock, you got one shot at it, right? It's probably going to be inside of a door, or let somebody cut it out for you, or you can't make a copy of the lock and then work on a pristine copy and not worry about the original evidence. Whatever you do to that lock, you're going to destroy the original evidence. So it's important how to know how a lock works before you even look at it. It's important to know how lockpicking works, so you don't do the same thing the potential lockpickers did to destroy their evidence. And then you have to know how to take it apart in such a way where you can prove later what you did. So that's what we're going to look at here. But first, how does a lock work? I really would like to share a screen here or something, but you know what? Why don't we just look at a lock? How far can we zoom in on this with the eyesight camera? This is a regular door pin lock you would find in the lock. I think it's probably more fun looking at a regular diagram anyway. There, how's that coming? Rando. Okay. So this is a lock. You've seen them every day on doors and things like that, wherever you go in. You put the key in. How's a lock work? You put the key in, you lift the pins, and then the lock turns. So there's things inside that make that happen, right? These things generally look like that. Let me turn my light up, see if you can get some more light on this. There we go. So you have those shafts there, or where the pins go up and down. There's springs on the top that keeps the thing spring loaded, and there's pins on the bottom. There's two sets of pins. The driver pins are on top near the springs. They're up here. Let me see. They're up here. And then the key pins are down here with the keys. Let me get a different lock here so you can see a little bit more what I'm talking about. It's not open yet, but up here are your springs and driver pins. Down here are your key pins because they touch the key. This thing up here is called the outer cylinder. The thing in the middle is called the plug. This obviously is the key. It's important to know what a key does when it goes into a lock and what it doesn't. Right? The key doesn't have any choices. It has to go in straight and stay straight because of the way the key's made and because of the size of the keyway. It will prevent the key from going side to side and up and down. Also, when you use the key, it's important to know that the key goes in, the pins lift vertically, usually without much friction against the walls, and then the lock turns easily. In lock picking, it's rather the opposite. Here's a practice lock from Tool. Here's a one of the more modern lockpick sets. Comes with its own wrench. Comes with an assortment of tools. I happen to like the half round or the hook, the small hook. But either way, yeah. Okay. The slides are basically text what I'm talking about. There's really not a whole lot more information on there than what I'm talking about here. So if you want to put them up, you can. We can maybe share them afterwards. Here, let me go ahead. I can do that real quick. Give me about 30 seconds here to share a slide with our Discord folks. We drop and drag these things on. No, they're small. I just got to get these two on the same screen. That's all. Where's our Discord at? There we go. Upload failed. Yeah, let's do it later, man. I don't want to waste the time here. Okay, so this is generally what a lockpick looks like. It's a straight piece of metal. It's got something on the end. There's various lockpicks. There's wavy ones. There's hook ones. There's diamond ones, pretty popular. All designed to lift up the lock, lift up the pins, and then turn the lock. Note that's the different order than a regular key. You put the key in and then you turn. There's no friction. There's no tension. The key also will hit the pins the same way every time. By very nature, when I put this pick in, sorry, it was off video there. By very nature, when I put this in, I'm feeling around for the pins. I have to know how many pins are in the lock. I have to know which direction it turns. I have to know how much tension I need going in. I have to know if there's pick pins. I have to assess all that when I'm picking a lock, unless I've done the same lock many times before. So all that's going to leave marks. Also, notice how long the pick is versus how long the lock is. Even in a full-size lock that we're going to take apart later, off an actual door, this pick is much longer than the lock. I'll put it over here so maybe the background's a little better. The pick is much longer than the lock. It's going to hit the back of the cylinder. A key will never hit the back of the cylinder. A key will never hit the sides of the cylinder, the top of the cylinder, the sides of the pin. It'll always hit the pins in the same way. And in fact, over time, it'll make them more and more dull. They come out of the factory very shiny and with tool marks on them. The key's going to basically burnish those marks off. If you Google forensic lockpicking forensics, you're going to come across a paper by Datagram, and you're going to come across. He did a presentation at DEF CON at DEF CON 17. It's called Datagram Lockpicking Forensics. That's a lot of what this based on. There's another guy called French Key, Alexander Trefalt. He also has an excellent paper on this lockpicking forensics. And if you go to lockpickingforensics.com or org, let me see which one it is, .com, that is Datagram's site. It is also on lockpicking forensics. So you'll see the effects that a key has. But think about when you put the same key in the same lock over and over again, right? It's going to wear the pins in the same way. It's going to do the same thing. If you find in a one mark that's not in the right place, that's a sign somebody put something inside the lock to try to manipulate it, and that sometimes could be enough. Normally, in most cases, because look, right? These locks are made out of brass. Most locks, quick sets and stuff like that, are made out of brass. This is a quick set. This one's an error. It's all made out of brass or bronze or something soft. These picks, because you want them to last, are made out of steel. Right? Most picks are made out of steel, so they're going to leave marks every time you go up against the pins. Because you have to put a force on them. Also, in lock picking, you don't do what this does: lift and turn. You simply first you turn, then you lift, and then you keep turning and keep lifting until you open the lock. Basically, you also need two tools for the most part, unless you're up against a one-pin lock, which is called a latch, by the way. You put a pin in like this. You have to feel. You got to get the thing up the shaft, up the keyway, up to where the pins are, right? And eventually, if you do this right, and of course this will never work in a live show. Should have taken most of the pins out here. Which lock is this? Yeah, and eventually it'll open like that. If you put the pins in the right position. Now, what is that right position? I have diagrams of this, but apparently those aren't being shown right now. Can't be shown right now, so we'll just look at this. When the inner cylinder, and we'll take this lock apart and look at it closer. When the pins on the inner cylinder line up with what's called the shear line between the plug or the inner cylinder and the outer cylinder, the lock is going to turn. The key, obviously, is designed to have the with the height, with the different cutouts here. See here, here. It's a 5-pin lock. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see where the pins are at different heights. Those pins, those key pins, will form a straight line when the proper key's inserted, and that's what's going to turn against the outer cylinder. Cause the plug to turn against the outer cylinder. In lock picking, you don't know which pin is which length, so you have to put pressure against the lock, turn the lock with a wrench, put pressure against it, lift the pins up one at a time, find out which pin's binding, and continue down the line until the lock opens. It's a lot of work. It's, especially if you haven't seen a lock before, you have to do a lot of testing and investigation. I love in the movies when they just take two of these, put them in at the same time, click, and the lock on the 7-pin Slage lock with 4 pick pins automatically opens. It's sometimes a little more difficult than that. So I just said the word pick pins, but what does that mean? So most pins in locks are really smooth. Gosh, I hope we can get the microscope going, because holding up an actual pin from a lock, is probably not going to cut it. They're quite small. This is not going to work. The presentation had it on there. Let me see if I can get the microscope going there, Mr. Rando. You were? Okay. Is it? Okay. And I guess my video is pretty small, so I'm not 100% sure, but let's put I do have a microscope here, a handheld 10 to 100 power microscope with a light and everything else. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. So basically, you have to know how a lock works, what a lock pick is going to do to it, how this goes in, and what the pins look like before this hits it. It could be a new lock, it could be something that's been opened with the key, and what the differences are. So we've seen locks, I'm sure you know what a spring looks like. Let me see here. That's not going to work doing it that way. Hang on. Let me get this going. Brando, where does it look best here? Okay, let me show you the other side, actually. So that is what a pin looks like. As somebody described it, it looks like a small bullet. That's the key pin. Notice the end is round, right? The lock the key doesn't really care what shape the pin is in, right? It could be pointed, it could be round, it could be squared off. The key goes in straight. The pin, the key pin, the driver pin go up straight against the spring, and it turns if everything's in the right position. For lock picking, you really care about the shape of that bottom part of that pin. This one happens to be round. Some are pointed, some are thinner than others. So if you have your thin pick, which we just saw, right, coming up against this pin, you see how thin the picks are, you see how thin the locks are, see how thin the picks are, and you see how thin the pins are. These two have to marry up right as you're picking it. So what's going to happen is this pick is going to this pick is going to hit the pins, and it's going to slide back and forth, right? You're not going to get it right the first time. It's not going to go in straight the first time because you're feeling around trying to figure out which pin is binding first. So all that leaves marks. That's the point. These pins came out of an American Lock model 1101. In case you're interested, I was in a lock picking contest. This is the only lock I couldn't open. Well, actually, I did open it. I just didn't know I had it open. So locks, when they're in a door, when the lock's sitting here like this, right? It doesn't require much force to open it, right? As soon as the pins are at the right level, it turns. When a lock like this is in a door, it has a mechanism on the back that you have to leverage to get the components of the rest of the components of the lock to turn. That takes effort. So if somebody's picking a lock in the real world, it's going to take a little bit more effort than it does turning it wise than if it's simply something they're holding in their hand. So in the real world, you should be able to find evidence of the lock being turned in such a way where the key would never turn it. In the case of the American 101 lock, it's a padlock, but this is the cylinder from the padlock. Okay, no matter what the hardware looks like around it, no matter how complicated they make or protective they make the hardened steel around it, the hasp, whatever, at the end of the day, you're just picking in one of these things again, right? Unless it's a wafer lock like on your car or something like that, and those are different stories. At the end of the day, you're still picking this. If you open up a master lock, usually it looks like this inside. It may or may not have this big top part holding the keys, but it has to have something holding the pins up here. It has to have something holding the pins and the springs. And looks in the door lock without that big piece will have to look something like that to hold the springs. So you're gonna do some, if not damage to the lock, you're gonna do at least some marking up when you put your when you put your tools in there. Rando, do we have any questions? I had mentioned pick pins before. The American lock that was having trouble first picking and then opening because it required so much pressure. Turns out it had, I don't know if you can see that clearly or not, but there's serrated edges. There's serrated edges on that. There's one near the closer to my head, I guess, the opposite of the bottom part of the pin. Those get stuck when you're trying to turn the plug versus the cylinder, and those are called pick pins. Those will make the lock feel like it's opening, and then it just locks up, and that's that. You can't turn it anymore. You have to start from scratch. This lock had 5 of those. Not only were the bottom pins all pick pins of different varieties, you have, I really want to see if we can get this microscope going so I can show these guys up close, but that's one of the pins there from the lock that I took out. You see the little serrations on the right side there. And then the driver pins on top of these, which I thought was kind of extreme, had these spool pins. Looks like a spool of thread. That's why they're called spool pins. These are troublesome. You have to lift them straight up if you're gonna open the lock. Now, if you're going against a spool pin like this, whether it's in the driver pin or the key pin, when you first start turning it, it will turn easily, then lock up. If you let off the tension and keep lifting, it will generally keep picking, but you have to know you're up against one of these first. So that requires exploration. You can test it out and stuff like that because it'll have different characteristics when you're trying to open the lock. But this lock had 5 pick pins. each key pin and driver pin was a different type of pick pin, and that's what made the lock openable. Though there was there were it would none of the pins would bind normally. So as long as you kept putting pressure on it and you got to the end, it would open almost every time. It turns out at the end. The problem was once you opened the lock and got everything in position, the way the lock was made, it took so much pressure to turn it. You can never turn it. I lost the wrench. You can never turn it with this enough to get the lock open. That's why we didn't think we opened the lock. But once I had the key and I realized how hard I had to turn it, then I realized the lock was open. So all that being said, let's do some forensics, okay? Some actual forensics. So we're gonna pick this guy as our example. So we want to. So somebody says, "Hey, this is the lock off my door. Can you tell me if somebody picked their way open because my stereo is missing?" Right. So, by the way, if this is the only thing between the bad guys and something valuable, you're probably lost already, right? This is lock sport we're talking about here. The seeing if anybody there. This is, I think, mainly these days an intellectual exercise to seeing if somebody picked open this lock to get inside, because criminals have better ways of doing it. There's better ways of doing surveillance if you're thinking that way. There's a million different ways around a lock, right? And by the way, if you've ever been in a situation where you had to pick a lock to get into a room and then get back out, in an actual door, it's much harder to pick the lock closed on the way out when you're usually in a hurry than on the way in. Just saying, okay? If somebody breaks into your house and picks a lock, they're hardly ever going to bother to pick the lock closed on the way out. Okay, so just want to emphasize that this is an intellectual exercise. And also, as Toole would say, you never pick locks that aren't your own, that you're not authorized to, and you never ever pick a lock you depend on, because eventually you're going to break the pins, you're going to screw up the springs, and it's just not going to work. That's how you can tell a lock's been overpicked, because even the key won't work after a while. But anyway, let's take this apart and take it apart, look at the pins, see what they look like and stuff, see what's inside of it. So in taking this apart, before you take it apart, one, start taking pictures, right? Take pictures under different lights, take pictures at different zoom levels, make an exact copy of this as you possibly can without, your material replicator, which doesn't exist. So get as much information off the lock before you actually touch it with any of your tools. You can find fingerprints, you can find maybe traces of acid, whatever was used against this lock. You're looking for tool marks. How did they get the lock open in the first place, right? If they did it, how did they do it? What you don't want to do in lockpicking forensics is ever open the lock with the key. You probably won't have the key in the first place, but if you do, don't open the lock with the key and don't pick it open, because that's the very thing you're trying to find. You're trying to distinguish between key versus picking. If you open it with a key or pick, then you just destroyed all the evidence you're probably looking for, because you have to assume that whoever picked this before you're looking at, knows a lot more about it than you do. The in here, here's the one that has been opened before. Obviously, somebody. Let me try this hand. Obviously, somebody took a nice tool there and opened this up just to show you how a lock works. But if you turn it around this way, at the very top, you can see initially where somebody took some type of Dremel or whatever and opened that top part up to get the ball rolling here. Because without that, you couldn't really do the rest. But that was probably how it was initially opened. A lot of locks have screws on the back where you can open the locks. Generally, those aren't available to a lock that's actually in an actual door. You only see those in lock sport. So anyway, let's go ahead and take this lock apart. If you've never taken a lock apart before, they are spring loaded. Some of them have really, really powerful springs, some not so much. But anyway, with this one, after we've taken the requisite number of photographs and things like that and documented and dusted for fingerprints and all that kind of good stuff, now we can start pulling things apart. I'm just going to take the pliers and pull this thing that was in red off, like that. So I'm opening up the lock, but I'm not touching the front, I'm not touching the pins. I'm just going to pull this off, and this lock does not have powerful springs. And yes, it's been opened before, so I know it. So I pretty much know what's coming. So let's. If you are going to take apart a lock, I recommend you get something like this to put the pieces in, or better yet, or with this, because they came as a set. Get something like this where you can put the driver pins, the key pins, the springs, and it holds 6 rows of each, so you can keep everything really organized. These things are invaluable when trying to open a lock. The also, before we look at this, on most locks in the back, there is a kind of hard to see on. I have this tape because I've already done some work on this lock. If I took the tape off, these pins would come flying out. There's a cotter pin back here. You slide the cotter pin out, and then the inner cylinder, the plug, can come in and out freely. If you do that and you don't have a following, if it's a full-size lock with full-size springs, and you do that and you pull the plug out, the springs are going to shoot your driver pins down, and you'll have a very hard time putting the lock back together. That's if you're rekeying the lock. And forensics doesn't matter. The forensics, your goal is not to put the lock back. Your forensics is to figure out what happened. What you don't want to do, and this is on Datagram's site as well. Let me pick one of these. Is you don't want to cut the lock halfway and cut through all the pins. If you're going to cut into the lock, cut it above just maybe just a little bit below this line right here, so you can not disturb the pins as little as possible. But I wouldn't recommend cutting into lock. That's pretty desperate. Normally you can open it up somehow like this. Like these look sealed, but with the Dremel or whatever, hacksaw, fine tooth hacksaw, whatever, you can eventually get to these pins. And remember, you're not worried about putting it back together for the most part. So on here, this lock has, I'll just use them. It's 4 of them. 5th one never came out. And if you've been picking a lock for a while, you take it apart, you can probably discover why it doesn't pick very nicely, or why it did pick nicely. Either way, so it's out, it's empty. Everything's sitting here on my laptop in pieces. I got 4 or 5 pins and 4 or 5 springs. These are smooth. Well, I'll put a microscope here for a second, but with the naked eye, these are very smooth, and these are very they're not pick pins, is what I'm trying to say. These are regular old pins. This lock was quite easy to pick. The key pins are all different lengths, as they should be. That'll match the key. And in this lock, the driver pins are all the same length. Driver pins are not always the same length. Sometimes you'll get driver pins where they appear to be cut. So there's 3 sets of pins. There's a key pin, and the driver pin is cut in half. That's because there's a master key. That's how a master key works. So if you're looking at lockpicking forensics and you see the driver pins cut in pieces into a certain pattern, then you know the pattern of the master key you're looking for. They may claim there's no master key. They might not know there's a master key, but that's one way to prove the existence of a master key. That can be important sometimes. And oh, look at this. I said no pick pins, but apparently I was wrong. That's a spool pin. That's a spool pin in the driver pin, so that would lock up every time you try to pick it. That explains why I was having some trouble initially with that lock. And it makes a big difference whether this pin, this spool pin, is in the front of the lock or the back, whether or not the lock picks from front to back or back to front. But why would a lock pick front to back or back to front in the first place? Because every time you see a diagram of a lock, everything lines up perfectly. Here, let's put this key back in this lock. See, now it won't have been turned with the key. Oh, there it goes. what happens when you do this too much to the same lock. So there's what a real lock looks like, not a diagram. The holes are, you can see that very well, but the holes are very messy. The holes in the bottom are much, much bigger than the ones on top, by the way. That's so probably they can get their drills and tools in, because this is one solid piece. The drills just go all the way up into the housing up there, the upper housing. And the same holes are drilled through the plug. And this is mass produced. Let's see if I can get this open real quick, and we'll take a look at this one as well, since this one has all the little pieces. And then how much time we got left? Enough time to break out the microscope and see if I can share that. There's a tool they make to do this, and if I put the key in, life will become a lot easier trying to open this up. Let me see if I can get this open real quick. I think this is worth looking at. Rando, any questions from the audience? Okay. So you can? Okay, good. So I just picked this. So I just took the cotter pin out. And now I'm just going to pull this. So that's one pin that just came out in my hand. That's one pin that just came out. And like all the others in the lock, it's serrated. Every single pin in this lock has some type of serration to it. Somebody observant might be saying, hey, you picked that lock earlier. It has all these pick pins in it. Yeah, well, I only have one pin. So, but that's why it was so hard to use the key, because I was trying to turn it and put the key in at the same time. Because the pick pins, I had to put the key in straight, make sure it was lifted, and then turn it. Even more so with the pin, with the lock pick, which is why it took a little bit of effort, even with the one pin lock. Here's the spring, and here's the driver pin for that same set of pin key driver pin combination. This one's not focusing, I can tell. That one is completely serrated. Called a serrated pin for that reason. But it's like a whole bunch of spools all together. That makes it very hard to pick. Normally, if there's one, if they're all like this, like I said, you can just jiggle a lock all the way open. It's like putting all your it's like putting, security appliance after security appliance inside your infrastructure. Eventually, it's like a Rubik's Cube. You're not going to be able to put everything together properly. You're better off with one really good thing rather than just layering on a bunch of things, hoping things work. But that's a different topic. So this is what the plug looks like. That was what we saw on the outside. Those are the holes on the inside. I'm trying to zoom in here so you can see how messy they really are. They're not in the line. They're not smooth, and look like they've been mass produced, because they have. You see how they're crooked. That's what makes a lock pickable. If these holes were perfectly aligned down the line on the cylinder, you couldn't pick the lock because there wouldn't be any difference in pressure. It's turning the plug against this with the pins in the way, causing different pressures because of the alignment, that makes a lock pickable. It makes all locks pickable. Now, you may think the more precisely it's machined, the harder it is to pick, when actually the opposite's the case. The more precisely it's machined and the lower the tolerances, the more precisely you can feel the mechanism, easier it is to pick. At least in my opinion. And this is what the outer cylinder looks like once you pull it apart. You see the holes there. You can see the holes there that we saw before. And there's the smaller ones on the inside. I guess you can probably see something there. Again, they're not lined up very well at a detail level. They're not extreme. They're not completely round. So that's what makes a lock like this pickable. They're mass produced. That's basically it. So let's see if we can get this camera rolling somehow. If you do buy a USB camera and wondering how to get the image to come up on your Mac, Photo Booth is the answer to your problems, believe it or not. Can you guys see that? Looks like you can. All the problems we have with PowerPoint, and this thing comes on automatically? Fantastic. Okay, good. So let's see here. Let me leave it there for just a second. That's the cord, by the way, you're looking at. I want to clear off a space here. I have lock pieces all across my laptop trackpad, which I don't need the trackpad, but I do need the space. And then we'll take a look at some of these and see if we can't do the complete the forensic task here of saying, hey, did somebody pick this lock? And Lord, I hope so. We can tell that because I've been picking that lock forever. Let me put some of the pins and stuff back on here. Give me 30 seconds. Rando, if you have any drum roll music, now would be an appropriate time. Since we're finally going to see all the pins and stuff we've been talking about. Also take a closer look at the shaft and the key. Okay, I believe you. Okay, good enough for me. Okay, I had something planned where I can have this on a stand. That didn't work out. Give me just a second here to get this thing focused. I want to focus it from a distance first, then we'll work on getting it. And I do apologize for this portion of the focusing. Okay. Let's see here. I had something earlier that worked. Let's focus on, that's a spring. And that's what one of the pins that's what one of the pins look like. Let me focus in here real quick. That's a key pin. Next to it, we have a driver pin. So let's look at the key pin a little closer to see if we can tell what's been done to it. Before we do that, Rando, I need about 30 seconds to get something to hold this microscope still. That kind of missed the plans there. 1 second. I tried this yesterday and it worked pretty well. I was trying to come up with something better overnight, but life happened. Work, forensics, all that kind of good thing. So let's see here. Very little you can't solve with Velcro and duct tape. One more. This microscope has different light modes. And while they look nice, they did warn you they're just faking it, especially the blue light. So that's the blue light on the blue cloth. There's the actual light. Okay. Now we can center it on this real unique thing. Now I can do this. Yeah. Do this. And now a little bit of focus and we should be good to roll here. Good to roll here. There we go. Okay. That's the working end of a key pin. So let me see if I can find a little pointier pointer. These vertical lines here, those are all from picking the lock. Let's see here. Let me I'll turn this thing on its end so we can see down the line. But just on the shaft here, you can see the right here, all the damage that picking this lock has been doing, because you're testing the lock, you're pushing your steel picks against the brass lock. Those are all signs this lock has been picked, and obviously more than once. But if you ever see things that are going up the shaft at all on a pin for a lock, it's been picked. It's been attempted to some degree. Now, if you're looking at a new lock that's been picked once, you're looking for very slight variations. Hang on, let me get a different one there. So there. And let's see here. When I move the focus, that's when we're losing this. Let me adjust the focus, then I'll get it back. See how damaged these things get when. This is the end that it pushes the driver pin, the top pin. This is the working end where the key hits the lock. The just took it away. Let me visually, I can't tell the difference hardly between the two ends, but as soon as you put it under the microscope, it becomes very apparent. Because the key is going to do work against the pins as well. If you look at Datagram's presentation, he shows you what a pin looks like after it's been used, with a regular key usage after 5, 100, 1,000, 5,000 times. And it just gets smoother and smoother over time because key's hitting in the exact same way. From the bottom of that lock, it's focused enough you can see the many scratches, the many scratches coming up. And the effect of the key is those circular ones. As the pin rotates as you're putting the key in and out, but everything else on that lock, on this pin, is from the picks. Let's look at a different one. Let's look at one from the 6-pin lock the 5-pin lock from before. And I'm going to keep it inside. Yeah, get rid of this cloth. It's part of the problem is this cloth that obviously isn't very stable. Let me put it inside something else that's a little more stable. I know somebody in the back of their head is thinking, microscope stand, it came with one and I can't find it. But this should work. This came off. I mean, I can adjust the light a little bit here too. It's a little bright. One second, let me get the focus back, then we'll get the. There we go. Again, the circular ones are the key. Anything that's not circular going around that lock is picking. So the on the top part of the lock, you can see that vertical line. That's a sign that's been picked. Toward the center, there's one that's going pretty much horizontally against the circular stuff. That's a sign of picking. On the bottom portion of the lock around 5 o'clock, there's a harsh mark there. That's a pick that was rammed against it, probably trying to figure out which pin was the loosest in the picking process. And even on the like at the 9 o'clock position, you can see a horizontal line going out. A key would never do that. A key This is a relatively new lock too, which is why those concentric lines, those are machining, that's not all key, those are machining. The key is gonna smooth those out over time. But you can see how the lock picking goes completely against the machining and the key work. The so that's what a pin looks like that's been picked, and not a whole lot of times. I haven't done a whole lot of picking on this particular lock, but the you can see even the marker too. The driver pins aren't going to have as many marks. The let's look at a this is obviously a key pin. The even here on the top of that lock, on the flat part and the cylinder part, not the bevel part, you can see that mark there. That's a sign that that pin was manipulated with a lock pick, but the key would never go into that position. That's what we're looking for in forensics, right? Things that could not happen normally under normal wear and tear. If you understand how a lock normally works, you know that mark is basically impossible to do with a key. So somebody's been inside that lock doing something with something. And earlier I was saying about the serrated parts of the lock. That's the bottom two things down there. And yeah, it looks like a little bullet. You're going to find also as you look at these that the pins closer to the front generally receive more force from the key. So those will be smoother than the ones in the back. So you can almost tell which ones go in the back and which ones go in the front. The one I took out last that had that's what a serrated pin looks like. You can imagine as you're picking that with the two cylinders going back and forth, how much friction that creates. Or in the case of this lock, too much friction that's constant, and you can kind of force the lock open that way. There's also, I mean, there's more to locks than just this, right? You have the key. That one presentation I mentioned earlier by French Key, he goes into the key marks, and if you can tell if a key has been duplicated, if a key has been impressioned, if a key has been used in a manner than otherwise prescribed, basically. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share on the lockpicking and forensics. It's basically good forensic practice applied to locks. Knowing how locks work, knowing how lockpicking works is all very valuable. And knowing what is normal and what is not is the most critical part of lockpicking. So thank you very much. And the thing says share my screen. I'm not even sharing the screen. It's just the video. Okay. So that's pretty much what I had to share. Are there any questions? Okay. I mean, it's pretty simple stuff. I mean, if you want to know a lock's been picked, you look for marks that the key can't make. And that's a sign that something happened. Now, what's not clear at this level is which picked which lock, right? So different picks will leave deposits on those lock microscopically, and those can be analyzed. On a certain pick set, those picks will take parts of the lock with it. So you can analyze the picks also metallurgically to figure out which lock it picked. People have have come up with carbon fiber picks that don't do any damage to the locks when you're picking it for anti-forensics. But it turns out that they pick up more from the lock you picked rather than leaving it. So you can tell exactly what lock they picked if you have the right tools and instruments and determination. So that's what I wanted to share.